Hi, I'm the host. This episode of MeatEater's American History is brought to you by Onnit. From 1806 to 1840, a new breed of American pioneer pushed further into the western wilderness than anyone had before them, endured unimaginable hardship and privation, and left an indelible mark on the history of the American West. These were the mountain men. In the early 19th century, the fur trade was booming. As the fashion for beaver hats swept the eastern United States, trappers fanned out across the unsettled lands from Canada to Mexico, seeking to capitalize on this craze, in order to reach the prime trapping grounds. These intrepid entrepreneurs had to brave the Rockies and the Great Plains, enduring incredible challenges along the way. To learn more about how they did it, we head to the small town of Pinedale, Wyoming, where historian and author Craig Romano joins us to discuss his book The Mountain Men for his Frontiersmen in the Making of America's Wild West. Welcome to the show. So let's just start off with, who are the mountain men? Where did they come from? Who exactly are we talking about here? Well, there's no simple answer to that question. The mountain men really represent a spectrum of different kinds of people who all come together in this one category. But I think broadly speaking, we can say that the mountain men were independent contractors. They weren't employees of a company. They were independent people who went out into the interior and sought their fortune by trapping animals, by hunting animals, by trading animal skins, usually beaver pelts, to the middlemen, who then took those skins down to Santa Fe or down to Missouri. And at least in the earlier period, they were largely men of European descent. By the later period, we have all kinds of different folks who participated in the fur trade and the economy. And some of them were Mexican, some of them were Native Americans, and some of them were African Americans. We even have Asian Americans participating in the fur trade economy. So it really broadens out in terms of the types of people involved. But I think when we talk about the iconic mountain men, we generally mean someone like a Jim Bridger or a Jedediah Smith. These guys who are largely men of European descent. And as the title of your book suggests, this isn't the only story of the mountain men. There are many different stories to tell. Could you break down just for us what some of those different stories are? So my book is called The Mountain Men because I wanted to suggest that it's not just a story of these larger-than-life heroic figures, these mountain men, but it's also a story of the mountains themselves. It's the story of how the Rocky Mountains and the other mountain chains of the West Coast kind of shaped and made the mountain men. The other thing I wanted to do with the book is use the mountain men as a lens through which to understand how the early modern American West was made. So in some ways, the book is actually about the making of the American West. And the third thing I wanted to do is use the lives of the mountain men to really rethink our understanding of American history during this early period. So often the history of this era is dominated by, the Lewis and Clark story or the Oregon Trail story or the Mexican-American War. And I wanted to push back against that narrative and say, let's pay attention to what was going on in the mountains. How people were living lives very differently than we might imagine. And I think the mountain men really allow us to do that. Just listening to you talk about it, I am intrigued about this idea of the lives that these men lived. Just one story among many. What kind of life did a mountain man live? It is hard to imagine anything more alien to the modern sensibility than the life of a mountain man. The closest we get to it today are, maybe hunters or anglers who go out and spend time in the backcountry. But most of us don't live like that. Most of us don't have to live that way in order to survive. So, what was it like to be a mountain man? Well, I think first of all, it was dangerous work. The mountain men were constantly facing threats from wild animals, from other people, from starvation, from exposure. This was very hard physical labor. It was very lonely work. And yet there was something deeply appealing about it to a certain type of person. And so the mountain men were really drawn to this way of life. They liked it. They didn't see it as drudgery. They saw it as an opportunity to forge their own path in life. And so it was an incredibly appealing way to live, even though it was incredibly difficult. I think one of the things that really strikes us about the mountain men is their absolute mastery of the natural world around them. These guys were incredible woodsmen. They were expert hunters. They understood plants and animals and geology and weather patterns in a way that we just do today. And that really comes through in reading about the mountain men. You read a passage like where Jim Bridger is crossing the Sierra Nevada and East, talking about the different kinds of plants that are growing and the animals that are grazing on them. And you just realize that this guy has an understanding of his environment that is so deep and rich and complex that we just do have today. And so I think that's one of the things that makes the mountain men so compelling. Their absolute mastery of their natural surroundings. So with all that being said, there's probably no place in America today where one could still live that same lifestyle. But there are places in America today where one could still live a pretty close approximation of that lifestyle. I think, if you look at places like Eastern Washington or the remote areas of Montana or Wyoming, or if you go into the forests of the Pacific Northwest, you can still find places where you can be out in nature. Away from the hustle and bustle of modern society, where you can really just live simply and rely on your wits and your skills to survive. And so I think there are places in America today where you can still live a mountain man-esque lifestyle, although probably not in the lower 48 states. I think if you go up into Canada, there's still parts of the Canadian wilderness where you can live that way. Absolutely. You know, we can't go back to the lifestyle of the mountain men, but we can still appreciate it, and we can still try to emulate it in our own lives in some small ways. I'd like to take a minute to thank the generous folks at Onnit for sponsoring this episode of MeatEater's American History. Onnit is a wellness company that believes in enhancing the human experience. Since its founding in 2010, Onnit has expanded its product line exponentially, while never wavering on its commitment to quality ingredients and formulas that work. And it offers over 300 products today, including supplements, vitamins, probiotics, protein powders, fitness equipment, and more. One of Onnit's best-known products is Alpha Brain. It is the flagship product of the neurology line of supplements designed to help increase mental clarity and cognition. Alpha Brain helps support memory recall, reaction times, and motivation, allowing you to perform at your best both mentally and physically. From the team that brings you the popular podcast MeatEater, this series explores the rich history of our favorite dishes and how they changed the world. Learn how the almighty taco took Mexico by storm, how pizza helped build the Roman Empire, and how the humble PB&J became a staple of the American lunchbox. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.